These are seemingly chaotic times in our nation, and in chaotic times, there is a tendency to abandon spiritual practice and to go numb. I've been remembering a time some many years ago, for its difficult clumping together of very painful events, all in a period of 1 week. One of our community members drowned while snorkeling, and in Santa Rosa, a young person wandered into the freeway and was killed instantly for no apparent reason. And two of my friends each lost beloved pets. And then there was the incident of somebody throwing a rock through the window in my office in the corner building over there. And another someone in the same week carved a swastika into the concrete in the sidewalk. You can still see the attempts to repair it and cover it up out there. And then an acquaintance's son attempted to kill himself. And by the end of the week, I felt unusually tired and empty. And the last thing I felt like was being positive, cheerful, let alone do affirmative prayer or sit down and meditate. And yet I knew I needed to somehow refuel my tanks because I was running on empty. What does a person do when they need to refuel their tanks? What do you do? Sometimes what I do is I escape and I don't deal with it. And that's okay for a bit, for a while. Another thing I do is sometimes I clean house because that somehow kickstarts me into a proactive activity. I've long known that tidying up things tidies up something on the inside too. So those years, many years ago, when all of this happened, I started tidying up in my study, and I tidied up a bookshelf as a way of bringing some order into my inner world. And as I was moving a book around, a greeting card fell out of one of the books I was handling it. And on the cover of the greeting card were these words: things to do today. Inhale, exhale. That does it too. Just be still for a moment and breathe. Sometimes I forget to do that. And I guess somebody had sent me that card because they imagined I would need it at some point. And I have this habit of saving inspiring bits and pieces of words, and I had tucked it into a book that I was likely to read again so that I would stumble on it randomly. And the card fell out of the book by Eric Butterworth, Spiritual Economics, and I had tucked it into one of my favorite passages. It is an important moment in our lives when we discover for ourselves the great truth that things may happen around us, things may happen to us, but the only things that really count are the things that happen in us. You may have precious little control of the elements or the fluctuation of the stock market or the unpredictable behavior of people. However, you live in a world of your consciousness, which is the sum total of the thoughts of your mind. You can control what goes on in your mind. This is not to say that it is easy, but to establish that it is possible. I read the passage, and even though I believed every one of the ideas to be true, the timing just wasn't right for a positive pep talk. The familiar words didn't help me as they usually didn't. In fact, they made me slightly annoyed. And I realized that sometimes a person just needs to stop and breathe and face what is going on just as it is and just as it is not to censure it, but to correctly identify it for what it is, to understand the immensity of it, without fleeing into positivity, at least not in its form of forced cheerfulness. I mention this because, as I said, things in our nation are seemingly chaotic. These are chaotic times, and it is tempting to slip into easy positivity as a way of avoiding dealing with what is going on. And if you hang around here at the Center for Spiritual Living, you no doubt will pick up some of the common language of our teaching, and it's filled up with positivity, as it should be. We'll say things like, it's all good, which is true in the spiritual realm. We'll even go so far as to say, well, look for the good in everything. That's a good enough practice. Sometimes we'll say this, maybe you've heard the phrase, turn entirely away from the condition. Have you heard that? Turn entirely away from the condition. Now I've got to explain what that means, because it does not mean go into denial. It does not mean don't deal with what is happening. It does not mean hide, avoid, run. No. To turn entirely away is what we do in our spiritual work. Yes, we are not to bring the problem into the prayer. In prayer, spiritual affirmative prayer, we turn away from the condition and entirely to the spiritual truth, to the solution. That is a good strategy in prayer. But it is not a good strategy if you're standing on the rail track and a train is rushing toward you. Then it's just straight up dangerous. So, in affirmative prayer, I deal only with the desired outcome. But in life, I deal with things as they are. Even when I'm doing affirmative prayer for health, I still eat and exercise, eat well and exercise properly. Even when I'm doing affirmative prayer for peace and equality, I still get to speak out and call out things for what they are. Oh, that's a spiritual practice. To call out things for what they are with loving kindness and humility and compassion and respect. For example, if I see cyanide on the kitchen table, I gotta call it out. That's cyanide. It's poison. That's not being judgmental. It's seeing it for what it is. I don't hate the cyanide for what it is. But there is no positive affirmation on the planet that will change the fact that if you consume it, you will die. You can be as spiritual as you like and still dead. Or if, for example, I see there is poison oak growing in the children's playground area, I don't hate poison oak for what it is. If I do know what it is, and I know what it does, and I let it grow, that's not being equal toward all plants. That's being irresponsible and negligent. See, because I'm thinking about our country right now and the reemergence of racial supremacy. Naming racial supremacy for what it is isn't being judgmental. It's correctly identifying something that is dangerous for all. And it's okay for spiritual people to call it out. Yes, we believe in the good of all creation. Yes, we see God in everyone. Yes, we sense the perfect, right, elegant symmetry in the ground of all being. Yes. And none of that makes us immune to poison. We still don't give it to our children. We still speak up if somebody wants to serve it to our neighbors. See, spirituality is not something that separates us out from the world. No, it draws us in deep and close to the world. It's perfectly loving and kind-hearted and decent and spiritual to call out the things that have the potential to hurt humanity, while all the while, at the same time, We're praying affirmatively for the good of all the while looking for the good, while all the while turning entirely away from the condition. Oh, looking for the good is a spiritual practice. It's the premise of the book, Ordinary Goodness. The idea is that if you look for the good, you will find it. It's there, even in the midst of chaotic times. It's just that in times like these, the good that we will find will not be in the form of the happy, peppy, cheerful type. No, more likely in the form of something sober, serious, enduring, decent. Like the something decent that is also simultaneously rising up in our nation at the same time. Like the statements that came from each of the service branches of the United States military, who all spoke out this week to name the thing for what it is. Admiral John Richardson of the U.S. Navy tweeted, "Events in Charlottesville were unacceptable and must not be tolerated. The U.S. Navy forever stands against intolerance and hatred." The Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Robert B. Neller, tweeted, "There is no place for racial hatred or extremism in the United States Marine Corps. Our values of honor, courage, and commitment frame the way Marines live and act." The Army Chief of Staff, General Mark Milley, tweeted, "The Army doesn't tolerate racism or hatred in our ranks. It is against our values. It's just decent." Story time. Because stories are like medicine to the soul. A colleague of mine who served as a chaplain in a local police department worked closely with the coroner. He would be called out to assist in making difficult death notifications to families. On one such night, he received the call to attend to a death from a sudden infant death syndrome, an especially tragic situation in which a child dies for no apparent reason. In the awkwardness of dealing with a long list of official questions, the young mother, supported by her husband, held their child as if holding on for a miracle to happen, for their baby to come back as suddenly as he had gone. Neither the coroner nor any of the officers at the scene wanted to interrupt the parents' vigil to remove their baby. Nevertheless, something had to happen, and the coroner looked to the chaplain for support. The chaplain took a breath and said as kindly as he could, trying to erase some of the finality of the words, "It's time," and gestured to the waiting coroner. The young couple looked up with resentment at the thought of giving up their boy to this stranger. Then everything changed when the coroner gently took up the baby's body and did something unusual. He held the lifeless boy and rocked him tenderly in his arms, saying, "I want you to know that I will treat him as if he were my own son." Sometimes when things get rough in life, I forget the incredible power of ordinary goodness and its ability to make a beneficial impact in the world. Sometimes grief and sadness drain my energy and leave me with nothing to invest in the present moment. But we can be kind even when we are tremendously sad. There remains in us the power of ordinary goodness that we can draw upon to do something simple that shows our caring and that will communicate compassion and understanding even when all is lost. The ordinary goodness demonstrated by the coroner inspires me. Its power is nothing fancier than plain decency. No special training is required to use ordinary decency. No special techniques. It can be messy, uncomfortable, and difficult, but we can trust it. Oh, it can be messy. Like the time in my 20s when I was working in a health food cafe as a waiter. and I got to serve a lady with cerebral palsy. And she wasn't expecting the pineapple salad she ordered to be served in an actual half pineapple, scooped out and balancing precariously on a plate. So it slid around the plate beyond the ability of her one good hand to manage, and raisins and lettuce and pineapple were spilling all over the table, and people in the cafe were becoming increasingly uncomfortable and awkward and silent. And I didn't know what to do. But I didn't want to be that guy who stands by and does nothing. So I sat myself down awkwardly next to her and asked her if she needed any help, and she nodded, which I took to mean she needed help eating. So I grabbed her spoon with the relief of someone who finally can do something to avoid the uncomfortableness, and started presenting mouthfuls of delicious pineapple salad to her, which it turns out is exactly what she didn't want. She wanted the meal wrapped to go. And she just needed some time to explain what kind of help she needed. But I was too much in a hurry to make myself feel better. And eventually she managed to blurt out, "Stop." Can you feel that moment? Oh, I could feel my cheeks burning with the realization of what I'd done. I had made things so much worse. Because I hadn't taken time to face what was going on in me. I hadn't taken the time to stop and to breathe. And so I rushed in like a bull in a china shop. And then it was her time to shine. And she put her good hand on mine and smiled. A smile that seemed to soften the moment, even calm all of her struggling muscles so that they could obey her will. And she said, "It's okay." And her kindness washed over me, and we both cried. Straightforward kindness is one of the most beautiful forms of ordinary goodness, and we can use it. And it's not always easy. And sometimes the kindest thing to do is to say, "Stop." And sometimes the kindest thing to do is to stumble forward, not knowing what to say or to do or how to say or do it, and to do it anyway, because a mistake made in genuine kindness is easier to forgive. I recently read a post by a colleague which touched me very deeply. She's the one who wrote, "These are chaotic times, and the temptation in chaotic times is to go numb or to abandon our spiritual practice." And I resonate with that because I remember how numb I felt when I read about Charlottesville. I felt afraid. I froze, and my attention strayed from what I know to be true. Now I already know that when I abandon my practice, I become less effective in creating the change I wish to see. I already know that I cannot trust the voice of anger in me. I already know I cannot trust the voice of hate, as tempting as it may be. So I'm doing what I can to breathe, to acknowledge my feelings, and to stay close to my practice of loving kindness, not to escape from my duty in the world, but because kindness is more true than chaos. Because kindness is the underlying truth of reality. Because kindness can fill us up to be useful. Because kindness is what reveals our spiritual identity, and because kindness can guide us to call out racial supremacy in a way that is resolute, harmless, and definite. You may remember 2 weeks ago I shared a quote from another colleague who said, "When a person professes to believe in oneness, That person becomes a spiritual sentinel, and as such must guard the light in the sense of not letting it go out. And that we must keep watch to protect kindness and offer support to those who have been long denied it. That's what I'm doing. I'm keeping watch. I'm speaking up. I'm educating myself, and I am supporting those who are afraid for their safety. And I have been feeling afraid myself, especially for the minorities in our community. And it takes me sometimes moment by moment resoluteness to return to an attitude of loving kindness when fear tempts me to abandon my practice. You may remember also a time here at the center when we prepared envelopes that were addressed to leaders in government, and we handed it out to each other in spiritual community with the encouragement to write down our own thoughts about civic rights and mail them off to leaders. It was a way of channeling our loving kindness into productive activities to thwart our feelings of feeling helpless. And I was feeling that helplessness again, and I thought to myself, I don't have to wait for the center to prepare envelopes for me. I know how to look up an address. I know how to express myself kindly while calling out racial supremacy. I can do that. And at the same time, enter into affirmative prayer for the highest good for all in the eternal pursuit to see the true nature of this reality. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, he advised us. He said we ought to acknowledge chaotic times for what they are, and at the same time to affirm that there is no need for them to continue. And to me, that means for me to keep my eye on good, but it does not mean for me to turn a blind eye if there is a train rushing toward me. Here are some more words from Ernest Holmes. They're a prayer, and I invite you to take them in as a prayer by breathing in and exhaling, letting your eyes close. Today, my spiritual eyes are more open wide, and I look out upon a broader horizon. Across all the experiences I may have had, which were limited or unpleasant, I now see the hue of a new dawn. My spiritual eyes are opening. I am letting go of that which is little, and I now enter into a larger concept of life. Dropping all fear, I entertain faith. I realize that every form of uncertainty is seeing only in part. So I open my spiritual eyes to that which is wholeness, which is greater, which is better, and my spiritual eyes are open. They are open to the breadth and the height and the depth of that life which is God, that life which is good, and its law which is perfect. The unconditional love of Spirit expresses through me as kindness, respect, caring, clarity, compassion, connection. Today, my spiritual eyes are open more widely.